Well, first of all, I wanted to thank you very much for the opportunity. I think this is fantastic. I know one of the things that we're really excited about is the opportunity to try to figure out ways in which we can take the Give All framework and really apply it to our work. You know, one of the big things that we've been discussing at Let's Talk LD is the importance of really making sure our work is very transparent to our stakeholders. It's a critically important part of not only who we are, but how we want to operate as a nonprofit social impact organization. So again, thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. So the social impact work, as we talked about the other day when we spoke beforehand, is such important work, I think, for nonprofit executives. I think that we are so busy getting on with the work of serving our communities and serving our stakeholders that oftentimes what gets lost in translation is the day-to-day operational and strategic work that needs to be done. And so I think one of the things that's really wonderful about the Give All toolkit is it really focuses us on slowing down and really thinking very specifically about the kind of work that needs to happen on an operational level and on a strategic level. And so I'm hoping during the course of this conversation, it's not only going to benefit our organization, but to the many partners that we work with and other organizations that we have strategic alliances with. I'm really hoping that this is going to be beneficial to them as well. Yeah. And as importantly, I'm really hoping that our community understands the value that we place in really paying very close attention to the intention that goes behind all of the work that we do at Let's Talk. So Give All offers a framework that happens to be, in my mind, a very good cultural fit. There are all kinds of business models out there, and we've looked at a few of them, and in my mind, some of them are just a little bit too, kind of structured, too formal. They really aren't a really good fit for how we are as an organization. And one of the things that I love about the Give All framework is it really is a very, very good fit for who we are as an organization. And so I love the fact that it's going to really allow me to facilitate a set of experiences for my team that allows us to really move closer to aligning our mission, our vision, our strategy, our operations, and more importantly, one of the things I think I mentioned to you is you had a quote in some of the one of the articles that I read that said you really hope that you saw people reflecting on the past, present, and future context of your organization that impacts and influences your brand.
Right.
And so I'm really hoping that today, as we chat about the Give All Toolkit series, that we really kind of stay focused around that kind of idea. The social impact work that we do is really nothing without transparency. And I know on Monday when we kind of talked and met each other, we really both talked about the importance of transparency in our work and how it helps to build trust. And I was just wondering if you would kind of revisit our conversation a little bit and talk about that and how you connect the Give All kind of context or framework with that whole process of building trust and consistency.
Absolutely. And one of the real key pillars that we talked about around branding is consistency. Because when you think about when you're going out and you're buying something, or maybe you're scrolling through Facebook and you see an ad, or you get a new brochure or annual report in the mail, when the items that you get don't look similar to other things that you've received from that organization, don't look or don't sound similar,
sure,
there's this kind of subconscious thing that happens where this trust is broken. Is this the same organization? Is this somebody else? Is there a connection between their programs, right? Are they organized? All of those things, even though they might not come out in plain words from somebody, they might not be realizing that they're noticing that. It's subconscious, definitely takes place. So we've noticed time and time again, and I'm sure you have too, the brands that really succeed are the ones that are just so consistent across everything that they do. And part of that consistency does come from understanding your past, your present, and your future vision.
Yes.
From my perspective, when you really focus on the past and the kind of legacy of the organization that you're working with, consistency naturally becomes more important to you because you're paying homage to something, right? Or you're leaning on the shoulders of somebody that came before you, right?
Sure.
And so that begs for consistency. Same with your present day. You're noticing different sort of things that are pushing on you, different trends that are out there, market demands, etc., that are building some stress and actually lead you to want to streamline a lot of your efforts.
Absolutely.
And consistency is a good way of streamlining as well. Then with future, thinking about that future vision that you want to head towards, if you're inconsistent in your language with that, that can cause a lot of confusion for your audience and your internal stakeholders as well.
Interesting. Well, one of the unique challenges that we face is we are relatively young as an organization, as a nonprofit. However, interestingly enough, our board of advisors and our board of trustees are comprised of people with an incredible depth and breadth of experience that have come from other organizations where, either people come from an experience being nonprofit managers, or they run schools, etc. And so I'm curious, in your experience, what is the best way, given what you've just articulated, of kind of consolidating those experiences and bringing those experiences into an organization that is relatively young?
Yeah.
When you don't necessarily have a past, for instance.
Absolutely. The funny thing, like, an organization might be brand new, but the people that are founding it, right, they're coming from a lineage of experience. And that, in a way, represents the past of that organization, which is kind of a confusing thing to think about, because an organization might have launched in 2010, but maybe it actually launched in 1995, in terms of where this is coming from.
Absolutely.
Everything that was built up. At Very Nice, we reference my first pro bono project sort of as our key moment in figuring out our model. I had no idea that I would even own a company when I took that on, but it was crucial to our history, so that's become part of our past, even though it was pre-Very Nice. And so same with you. It's a new organization, but you're bringing these years and years of experience and of interest and passion that I think represents that weight that you want to hold on to. When it comes to consistency and being new, the funny thing is I think that being consistent is actually more important when you're new than when you've been around for a while.
Interesting.
A good example of that, I don't know if you've seen this just happen, where IHOP said that they're going to change their name to IHOB, right? And it would be International House of Burgers. And a lot of people think it's maybe a publicity stunt, but what's funny is, of course, they were able to do that because they've been around forever. People are still going to eat there, right? Even if they change their name. If you do that 3 months in, it's just not going to work.
Correct.
Right? That's like starting over. But for them, it's okay to make that kind of shift because of their already kind of proof of concept and interests.
But it is very interesting because I will tell you that even in my household, that has been a source of much contention among the kids. I mean, they've been kind of, what does that B stand for? And I notice on social media, it's like, are you kidding me? And even celebrities are weighing in on, what is this B all about? So there is this sense of being connected to what IHOP really is. And so I think even when there is an established brand, I think sometimes people do struggle with the idea of evolution or change.
And that right there underscores the importance of the past in a brand, right? Because if the past wasn't important, no one would care that they changed their name, right? Sounds simple, but that's the case. There's a lot of, when I was a kid, I had breakfast there with my grandpa, and now you're going to do burgers? What's that all about, right? That's an importance of the past in this brand.
Exactly. So when you're thinking about brand strategy, and particularly within the context of the Give All model, clearly past is very important. So for younger organizations like ourselves, because obviously the context is within our organization for purposes of this conversation, how do you make sure that the point of reference is calibrated properly when you're looking at past, present? I mean, clearly the future is a given, but how do you make sure that there's an appropriate calibration between the past, which is kind of an aggregation of everyone's collective experiences, of all the stakeholders that are responsible for the operations of the organization, and then kind of rolling that into a look at what the present organization should look like.
Right. So in that case, I would say that the past can represent more the ambitions and the original intentions of starting this thing or of joining this thing, right? The board members made a decision to join, you made a decision to start, right? Capturing that, in a way, you're capturing your past right now, because you'll look back at that in a few years and say, oh yeah, guys, let's not forget this is where we're coming from, right? So you're kind of creating that history. Versus present, I would use more as an opportunity to think about the present landscape in general. So what are the market demands right now in the space that you're operating in? Who are the big players in that space, et cetera? And then future, really about that kind of ambition, goal, yeah.
And of course, that present context will evolve as the market demands change, as your audience may or may not change.
Yeah.
As well. Very, very interesting. Okay. So I'm just curious, and kind of taking a step back a little bit. I'd like you to just tell me, whatever comes to mind immediately, what does Give All kind of represent to you in the broader context of the mission and vision of the Very Nice Company?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few things. First, where the idea came from, I would say there's kind of a mission aspect of where it came from, and then it really is kind of a vision strategy aspect of where it came from. So the mission, when you think about Very Nice, we've been around for 10 years now. We've helped hundreds of organizations, have provided a lot of value to these organizations. But at the same time, for every organization we've helped, there's something like 1,000 that we haven't in terms of just the greater landscape. And that realization definitely hit hard of, well, if our mission is to alleviate expenses for nonprofits so that they can reinvest in their impact, can we kind of keep doing it in the traditional service-oriented way?
Sure.
And the answer was yes, but it's not enough. So yes, because that's great. It's immediately helpful. It's always helpful to have a professional to work with. But it's not enough. What I mean by that is we're only human beings,
well, of
right?
Course, yes.
And so by kind of writing down and really well documenting our approaches to these things, exactly how we would do it, and making those available to every organization on Earth, we're actually able to help them without needing to actually spend the physical time helping.
Sure.
So it's in a way kind of like automating ourselves. Displacing ourselves is kind of the greater vision of that to an extent. Some good context is whenever a nonprofit comes to our website and applies for our services and for whatever reason we can't take it on, we've always found that they are either lucky enough to find someone else to do it pro bono, but maybe that's 10% of the time. The 90% kind of chance is that they end up having to just do this work themselves. And we figure, hey, let's target those 90%. If they're going to have to do it on their own, they might as well have some tools to help them out, right? And so for us, it's kind of a way to expand our mission to help as many people as we can within the limitations of being humans.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's a big aspect of it, is the mission. Then the vision of this on the greater scale, there's a real shift in the market right now, in the economy in general, especially around startups, that there's a big kind of solo entrepreneur movement. And so that's people that are out there, they're doing SEO for people, freelance, and they're digital nomads, or, this kind of growing economy. None of those people will ever be clients of ours because they don't have the resources, they don't have a team to kind of, implement these things, etc. And so part of our perspective is how can we also capture that market, a market that we wouldn't normally be able to capture. Maybe it's through these tools. So that is sort of a strategic decision that we had made in order to be able to just touch as many areas as we can, whether that is for the nonprofit employees that need our help but couldn't get it, or for a whole growing market of people that just never will hire a design firm.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I really love about the tools, as I was really doing my research and really kind of sitting in, whether they were a really good fit for our organization, was the fact that they are very adaptable and scalable.
Yeah.
And I think it's really great, whether we're where we are now, which is relatively small, or as we grow, they're really tools that your organization can really grow into. I'm curious what your response is to, nonprofits typically start from, the saying, invention is something is the mother of invention. Necessity is the mother of invention. And so for a lot of social entrepreneurs, they really start things because they identify a problem that they're really passionate about solving. And I know part of your story really begins right there at that place. And so there are many entrepreneurs that start that may not, in fact, in many cases, may not have a background in business and may not have any understanding whatsoever. So there's clearly a practical benefit to the GiveAll tool set.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious what you think about, and I'm sure you've encountered this type of social entrepreneur who just really believes that I'll fly by the seat of my pants. I'll allow my passion to carry me forward, and I think that's going to be sufficient. And in some respects, some people that are doing social impact work really are able to sustain some level of success doing just that. So I'm curious if you have thought about that and what your response is to that.
Absolutely. So one of the really big frameworks that is was started with our Models of Impact toolkit, but also made its way into GiveAll, is this idea of constantly balancing impact and revenue. And so that's what the give half model is, right? It's less sexy to call it this, but the give half model is also the get half model.
Yes.
Right? So we are charging people for work too, right? We are making money. That's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to only do the pro bono work, but there's a pretty quick rude awakening that you can't do that, right? You have to sustain yourself. And so passion alone can get you really far, but there is this kind of wake-up call that happens at some point where you realize, wow, I'm feeling so fulfilled, so into my work, but I guess that was a good 3 months. I better go get a job now, right? So when you think of impact and revenue, you could also see that as passion and survival. You could also see that as values and value.
Yes.
these kind of intersecting things that you really have to have both of those to be fulfilled and supported. And that is something that's core to every method that we use, whether it's thinking about marketing, we're thinking about, hey, what's the impact that this audience is creating? What's the revenue that this audience is creating? Having that kind of dual mindset, I think, is very helpful.
Got it. One of the things that I wanted to do in anticipation of this conversation is really speak to our board, both of the advisors and directors, and really get a sense from them where their priorities were in our conversation. And they articulated 4 areas that they wanted really to kind of flow through our conversation. In their minds, there were just 4 priorities that our organization, that they feel are just consistent and really are a critically important part of our DNA. 1, to improve the way that our stakeholders and partners experience our organization, number 1. 2, improve the way that our stakeholders and partners recognize the value in our organization. 3, create opportunities to present real-life examples of our organization at work operationally. Of course, our stakeholders and our community sees the products that we produce and the programs we produce. But again, in keeping with that idea about transparency, we really feel it's important for people to understand all of the hard work that goes into the work behind the scenes and the hard work we're doing in being present and how we approach the work. And then 4, improving how our stakeholders and partners understand and evangelize our brand is importantly. And what we really liked is we were kind of making this list. What I loved was the fact that there were extraordinary intersections between that and of course the GiveAll framework. And so in thinking about that, I thought about design thinking, and I know that you're a designer. And so I'm just curious if you consider the GiveAll toolkit an application of design thinking.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about design thinking is, as a methodology, what that really calls for is this concept of divergence and convergence. So divergent thinking as in, hey, no wrong answers. Let's just blast out as many ideas as we can. Let's just research things, get into Google search, rabbit holes, all of that stuff.
Right.
And then convergence being that moment of really bringing it together and trying to filter those ideas, etc.
Okay.
And so in that sense, a lot of our methods are following a framework like that. So each toolkit you'll see it's broken into learn, invent, program, report. And so when you think about learn and invent, that's very divergent, right? You're taking time to think about, what's our goals, right? What are our individual passions? You're coming up with ideas, you're brainstorming. Again, very divergent. Then converge is very much the program part where you're starting to plan things out, you're starting to fill out worksheets, whatever that might be, to kind of get into the nitty-gritty details. And then report being sort of a mix of the two, because you want to be open to other people's ideas based on what you're hearing, so that's fairly divergent as well, but it's convergent in that you are forced to be very succinct in sharing your concepts with other people. So it is kind of a method for delivering, a concept in general. So in that case, I would say it's similar to the just fundamentals of design thinking, or of the way that designers kind of operate in general.
I'm curious how the approach, as you were thinking about how Give All would evolve, is differentiated from other approaches, like either management theory approach or business approaches, and why this would be important for nonprofit organizations in particular.
Yeah. So if you kind of scan the marketplace of toolkits in general, there are a lot. There's a lot out there. And there's kind of a couple of spectrums that we notice. There's the very academic side, the kinds that you see coming out of major management firms or institutions and universities. And then there's these kind of tools for designers that are very common. But what I noticed is the tools for designers are really great at being very kind of easy to follow.
Yes.
Versus,
almost kind of paint by number.
Exactly.
Okay.
Versus the kind of academic side naturally is much more scientific and a bit kind of dense in content in general. And so what we're looking for is how can we provide some of the kind of ideologies that the management side is providing, but in a way that the design toolkits are providing.
Got it.
And that to us was this big missing piece, was actually creating toolkits that were not intended to be used by other designers or professionals in this space, but instead by people that are boots on the ground facing those problems or facing those issues.
Got it.
So that's kind of the big differentiator, I would say. There's not a lot of toolkits out there for the nonprofit employee.
Well, even if there were, the problem is because you are so resource poor, it's very difficult to hire a consultant or to go out and purchase those tool sets so that you can apply them organization-wide.
And that perhaps is the other major differentiator, is that these are free.
Yes.
As opposed to being thousands of dollars.
I'm not going to lie. That helped. But here's the thing that was really interesting. As I was talking to my board about this, I was mentioning free, and of course you get the eye rolls, like, oh, great. Right? Because oftentimes people associate something that does not have a value assigned to it as being of poor quality. And then when they had an opportunity to really have the conversation about the tools, they're thinking, hold on here. This is something very, very different from what we're accustomed to seeing. So kudos to you.
Thank you. And it's partially, it's trying to be disruptive in that way as well, and in a way where one of the first design firms to open source everything that we do, which is kind of exciting and disruptive and something that I personally want to be a part of. You know? And so in a way, there really is no catch, to be honest, right? Because that's kind of the ambition, is to be very radical with this. Okay.
And I'm curious, I know that you have recently started as a professor at USC, in the Ivy and Young Academy, which, speaking of disruption. So I'm curious, as you think about the tools that you've developed, Models of Impact, and then Give All, and of course just, your firm, very nice company. How much of that do you bring into, or do you want to bring into
Yeah.
your experiences as a professor?
Yeah.
Do you want to create the next generation of Matthew Monoses? Or, how do you see that kind of integrating into what you would like to kind of cultivate into the culture of the Ivy and Young Academy?
Yeah, so for me, actually, a lot of the history of Very Nice, I had the kind of professor hat on. Before USC, I taught at Art Center as well, and I've always loved being able to kind of mix those worlds, mainly because, I looked back to when I was in design school, and there were a couple of practicing professors who were giving, on-the-ground experience of,
Sure.
oh yeah, yesterday I worked with this client. But it was pretty rare to come by, actually. And so I was thinking, what kind of teacher would I want? Ideally, would I have wanted back then? It probably was somebody that was actively working in the field. And I don't mean one client a year. I mean like a
really
team,
working.
like really doing this. And so to me, crossing those borders is really important. And actually, already in the Ivy and Young Academy, I've done this quite a lot. So one great example in the narrative and storytelling course that I developed, 2 of our employees and 1 of our clients was a central part of a case study that we developed for that class. And the class is actually using the Give All toolkit to work on a project. I also just finished developing a course completely centered around models of impact as well. And so bringing these in is really important to me because it's what I know, it's how I know to do these things, and they just happen to have been written down. So here's some great resources for these students instead of...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, instead of kind of saying, go buy these books, it's use these tools, right? It's a nice opportunity for them.
But also a wonderful point of reference for doing social impact work, I think, because I would imagine... Although I think that this generation is probably more inclined than previous generations to be attracted to this kind of work, I think it's wonderful that they have kind of this framework, and they are now exposed to frameworks to show them how, if they are interested in being social impact entrepreneurs, right, or just running a social impact nonprofit, there's this framework already in place that they can utilize as young people to start the work that they want to do. So
Absolutely.
I think that's incredible.
Absolutely. A great, really fun class I had last term was called Design Consulting that I taught with another professor, Steve Barth, and we brought in real clients for that class to work on projects with. And one of those was one of our longtime clients, Heal the Bay, which is a really great ocean preservation organization. And we worked on concepts as a class. We split the class in 2, so my team was 7 students working on new ideas for their aquarium. And those ideas got presented to the board. So it's kind of real, tangible pro bono project they're able to do by way of just being in the classroom, which I think is something that I hope more teachers actually do in their classes. A lot of the times, especially in design school, you're given these kind of fictional, speculative prompts.
Correct.
When there's this whole row of organizations that are dying to have help.
Absolutely.
Might as well make it real.
I'm just curious in terms of brand strategy, how important do you feel it is to really make sure that there's tremendous amounts of relevance in terms of solving very practical and real problems?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. I mean, when I think about just my brand as a teacher even, I want to make sure that students look back at me and think, oh yeah, that guy taught me something that I'm actually using at work right now.
Yes.
That means a lot to me, is having that relevance and being able to pull those real world examples.
Yeah, this is one of the things we're going to cover. We're going to be using the Give-All tools are going to frame our retreat, our organizational retreat in August. And one of the things I know that is a big discussion that we're going to be having is that around branding. And I think one of the things that makes a lot of our work very disruptive is nonprofits, particularly in the advocacy and the kind of advocacy work we've done has been done the same way for a very long time. There are some very well-established organizations that tend to do the same thing over and over again. And one of the things that is very important to us is really kind of re-examining how we're serving students we serve serve students with special needs.
Yeah.
How we serve those students very differently and more efficiently and more effectively.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, we're really looking outside of what has traditionally been done and partnering with very non-traditional partners to make sure that we're really exploring in the very broadest possible ways, how we can look and re-examine how this work is being done. And so we're paying very close attention to how those Give All tools can really be used on a variety of different areas.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious in just looking at that particular challenge that we're trying to address, if there are things that come to mind immediately when you think about your Give All tools that could be used to help us solve that specific problem.
Absolutely. So one of the things, when I think of the marketing strategy toolkit, for example, that one has a bit in it around randomization, which is really fun, and that is kind of mega divergent thinking. We have dice here on the table. We use dice for that. So for example, one kind of piece of that in the invent phase of the toolkit is to imagine new activities, new marketing activities that you could do. And we have a list in the back of different types of touch points or activities that exist, anything from a billboard to a radio jingle, for getting your message out. And they're listed, 1 through 20. You roll a 20-sided dice or use an online number generator, and just for a moment think about what would happen if we did that, right? You might not necessarily think that a radio jingle makes sense, but let's just take 5 minutes and think about it, That's really helpful, because very often we bring a lot of assumptions of what kind of activity we should be doing or what kind of initiative.
Absolutely.
And why not lose 5 minutes of our life just contemplating something we never would have thought of before. So that feels like a really great fit in the marketing space. In the branding space, I think by walking through branding in the opposite direction that a lot of people think to do at first is also really helpful in challenging assumptions. So what I mean by that is oftentimes you're developing a brand, you sit at a table and say, we need a logo, or we need a website. And what we've found is that should actually be the last step, is thinking about that. Instead, start with that context that we talked about earlier of past, present, future. Really get to know that kind of inner organization of what's going on here. Why are we even here? What's our ambitions? Where are we coming from? What are other issues that are out there in the world right now that people are facing or solving in a similar way as us? From there, moving into, okay, now that we know all that, what's our position in this space? How are we unique? What are our competitors, right? How do we kind of stand out from them? Then thinking about the identity, which is still not visual. It's really what kind of key words represent us based on all these things we're talking about, what kind of imagery comes to mind, etc. And then you can say, okay, we do need a logo.
Got it.
After going through all of that process, because it confirms or denies a lot of the original assumptions.
Absolutely.
It might. This has happened to us before, where we've worked with a client and they say we really need to rebrand, and we tell them, we've done all this and I don't think you need to, right? Because your customers kind of don't even look at your logo. They're spending all their time on your Facebook page. Let's pour energy into that based on what we're seeing with the positioning and the people that we're after, et cetera.
Interesting. So, because this is really a bone of contention, I think, even within our organization, when we're thinking about so much on that visual imagery and that one thing, the website or the logo. And I think it's incredibly sage advice to really think about where the priorities are. Where are your stakeholders finding you?
Yeah.
And really putting your energy, it sounds like what you're saying, really where your customers, where your clients, where your stakeholders are finding you first.
And the priorities being not your priorities internally, but the priorities externally, right, of what those customers need. That's something that the private sector does left and right, that I think the social sector does a really great job doing with their beneficiaries, but not so much with their kind of greater stakeholders, is thinking about what are the needs they have and how can we create things that actually solve those problems for them. I think a great example, I think I saw you joined our Facebook group.
Yes.
Yeah. That came up because one of our volunteers was saying, I'm glad that I'm part of this network, but I feel like I don't get to see the other people in that network. And so, we could have spent 6 months creating some beautiful online social network for very nice's people, right, and collaborators, but instead in 2 hours we made a Facebook group.
Sure.
And now it has almost 500 people in it, so that kind of just, what do they need? How can we just fulfill that need in the simplest way possible? I love that approach.
No, absolutely. I'd like to dig a little deeper on that whole issue. I know we started the conversation, which I thought was incredibly fascinating, talking about how one of the things that you see with Give All is kind of this juxtaposition between really when you're working with for-profit companies, really helping them appreciate some of the things that, social impact, nonprofits do really well, and vice versa. And so I'm wondering if you could speak more about that, because I think that's an important conversation that nonprofits really need to have about the value, but also, the fact that there are certainly things that we do really well that could be really appreciated by for-profit companies as well.
I think it's one of the happiest accidents that we've had of this give half model, is that means our feet are in both sectors at the same time. And so as a result, we've naturally picked some things up over here, some things up over here. And we have thought, why not do these things together? So why can't a for-profit have a great social impact initiative?
Yes.
Why can't a nonprofit have a great revenue model, right? And I think that there's a lot of seeing those as two totally different worlds.
Yes.
But the funny thing is, a nonprofit, the only difference is the tax status.
Yes.
Nonprofit doesn't mean that you can't profit. It just means you can't take a Christmas bonus.
Exactly.
So there's pretty little differences when you really think about it.
Absolutely.
At a higher level, and so we can be open to learning from both spaces quite well.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's oftentimes lost, particularly with, I think nonprofit executives typically appreciate it, but I think sometimes communicating that with your advisory boards and sometimes even with some board members, even though their primary responsibility really is, raising money, I think that is sometimes lost.
Yeah.
And even with your stakeholders, that message really is lost, that it is critically important. In fact, your ability to effectively provide qualitative program offerings really is wholly reliant upon your ability to generate revenue.
It's true, and there is this weird tension between those two sectors, and I think part of it is there are some private sector kind of histories of just coming in and doing things without getting any community consensus and so on. I mean, I think gentrification is a great kind of result of lack of regulation, maybe, or private sector issues, capitalism issues, that nonprofits look at, and they would never have done that, right? That's something that's so core to the culture of the private sector that there's this big cultural difference in terms of assumptions of power or of influence or anything like that. But there's also a lot of good in the private sector to learn from. It's something that I always believe. Yeah, absolutely.
In your brand strategy and identity module, there was an interesting quote that I drew upon, and I want to share and then ask you a question around that quote. You say, employees and customers need to take ownership of the brand to make this easier. Find ways to create a brand strategy that's informed by every stakeholder. So I'm wondering, when it comes to brand ownership, elaborate how and why customers need to take ownership of the brand. And are there practical limits to this? And is there a tipping point?
Yeah, so I would say, I think there are limits to it in that there are a lot of brands that everybody encounters every day. So it's hard to be the poster child of 100 brands, right?
Yeah, sure.
That you might have in your closet or your refrigerator or anything
absolutely.
Like that. But what we've seen is that a lot of people are joining this kind of movement of the lifestyle brand, where there's certain brands that by engaging with, you actually are further defining your own brand. I think a great example of that is social enterprise. People choose to only purchase products that are giving back in some way. That helps define who they are, actually. And so as a result, those brands need to kind of open their story up to adopting other people to be part of that as well, kind of building a community.
Absolutely.
A big kind of community is a big buzzword right now, but what's really great about the idea is this shift from a kind of group of customers to a community, is that a customer, you only see their value as purchasing something.
Correct.
Versus a community is kind of a longer term relationship.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think what immediately comes to mind when I read this, was reflecting on this quote, was the old idea of the importance of brand evangelicals.
Yeah.
I think that's just so critically important.
Yeah.
I know that one of the things that we're constantly discussing, it comes up and every time our board convenes, is this whole idea of mission creep. And I think that really spoke to me, and which is why I posed the question, is at what point, when you're a purpose-driven organization, when you're kind of pulled astray from your intended purpose, at what point do you kind of put up a yield sign and say, hang on? So how do you, and in what way does the Give All tool set help you address that whole issue of mission creep?
Yeah, so a number of the tools do have this question of who won't you work with, for example, and what don't you do, what aren't you looking for. Those kinds of questions are very important in trying to actually put some barriers up. And what's barriers, as bad as they can be in a lot of situations, are really good when developing a brand or a value proposition, because by knowing what you aren't, first, even if you start there, you actually get to know what you are, right?
Yep.
We will not work with oil companies. Okay, well then, what does that say about us, right? Those kinds of things can be really helpful. The other thing that I would say, just around kind of back to the opening this brand up to other people as well, and you mentioned the idea of being kind of evangelical, right, of the brand. There's a really great story of the founder of Tom's Shoes, Blake Mycoskie. He was at the airport. This was in one of his books, and he was wearing his shoes. They had just started, the woman in front of him was wearing his shoes. And he said, "Oh, what do you think of those?" And she told the story of how the company was started to him, not knowing who he was. And that's really amazing, because all of a sudden that's a sales force as well, right?
Absolutely.
For you. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I think it's critically important. And I think with doing social impact work, that is your best dream, to be perfectly honest, that the people who really consume the products and services that you produce really are so absolutely invested in what you're doing that they are helping you develop and perpetuate the good work that you're doing.
Absolutely.
And I was also intrigued by, there was a wonderful quote from your collaborative analysis module. You say, in any successful collaboration, all parties involved should work individually to play to their own individual strengths, while also advising one another actively on the task that contain a shared skill set. Yeah. So complementary strengths and skill sets are important factors for successful collaborations. And I know our lifeblood, I know for our organization, is really our strategic alliances and strategic partnerships. It is really what makes our work possible. It enables us to amplify the good work that we do. And so I do realize, though, that in some forms and some combinations of collaboration can result in kind of shifts in brand perception, particularly when it comes to cultural values. And this is somewhat related to the other question, so you can imagine this is kind of something that we wrestle with. So nonprofit organizations may be particularly vulnerable in this regard. How essential is cultural fit when it comes to choosing partners for collaboration?
I would say it's very essential. This is where impact and revenue comes back as well. In that toolkit, we think about what is the impact this collaboration is making and what is the revenue this collaboration is making. The big mistake that I've seen a lot of nonprofits make is they start a partnership purely for the revenue aspect. So, hey, we've got this great, nonprofit that is employing, a certain kind of marginalized group of people to make arts and crafts. Okay, great. Let's partner with Neiman Marcus to sell
Sure.
those. Is Neiman Marcus in it for the impact, or like what are they in it for?
Sure.
And having that kind of conversation really helps define the culture of that collaboration. I would say that also leads to a mutual respect, which the quote that you shared is kind of getting at, that, hey, you're really good at this, I'm really good at this. Those things together make something really powerful. Let's let each other do what we're good at and just help each other out, as opposed to let's do everything together all of the time. That can lead to some toes getting stepped on,
Sure.
I found as well. Yeah.
Interesting. So, in closing, I'm just curious. Again, we're a young organization, and so for those young organizations that you work with, what are some of the big mistakes that you see young organizations make, and then how do you mitigate some of those mistakes, and how can the Give All tool set kind of help?
Yeah. So the last stage of any of the Give All toolkits is report. Learn,
Yes.
invent, program, report. That's in there because I think the biggest mistake, especially younger organizations make, is not share where they're at more often. And I know transparency is an important word to both of us. That's getting at it, right? So
Yes.
I see a lot of younger nonprofits spending months coming up with their marketing strategy, for example, instead of just opening up a Facebook page and shooting some content out there and seeing what people like. Really being kind of open to being vulnerable and just trying things in those early days is great, because there's so much less to lose at that point.
Yes.
The audience isn't necessarily there yet. Maybe there isn't that big donor yet that you're going to be bothering with your experimentations, etc.
So the risk taking at this stage is
just go for it. Absolutely. Instead of waiting to be perfect, just get it out there and see what happens.
interesting.
I hope that's something that actually continues throughout the history of any organization. It's just now it's easier to do that. So
Sure.
being open to that, not trying to be perfect. A Squarespace site is fine. A simple logo is fine. Really thinking about who you are and where you want to head is just so important in terms of getting off on the right start.
Boy, is that sage advice, and it's perfect for us, because I know that is at the center of many of the discussions we've had. I want to thank you.
Yeah, thank
you
you
so very much. This was fantastic.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool.
All right. All right, guys.